So I welcome you all to our second Urban Design Forum of 2022. And tonight we're going to be talking about foundations in civic design. My name is Gary Gaston, I'm the CEO of the Civic Design Center, and on behalf of our staff and our board, we welcome you all here. As we were just talking earlier, it's so exciting to have an in-person event for the first time in 2 years and be together for our Urban Design Forum. This is also a hybrid event, so we have other people joining us via Zoom as well. So really excited about this program. For those of you who maybe are joining us for the first time, I know we have one person who's new here and online. Our mission at the Civic Design Center is to advocate for civic design visions and actionable change in communities to improve quality of life for all. And as a part of that, ongoing programs and events that we host, we have 4 main focus areas of our work and our mission to implement our mission. And those are education and advocacy. So this is an example of that type of component. Our Urban Design Forum dates back to the late 90s, before the Civic Design Center even existed. And it's a monthly educational program. And then we also want to engage in the advocacy component for that. So taking the ideas and experiences that come out of our programs and take that and hopefully change it, some policies in the city to impact the change. We focus on shaping healthy communities, which is all about how our built environment impacts our public health. Mobility and land use is a major focus of our work. It's how do we get around our city, and what are the uses that are related to those uses, to the transportation components, and reclaiming public spaces, which is all about looking at how we improve existing public spaces and potentially create new spaces. I want to thank our annual sponsors for the year. Our annual sponsors are Presenting Level, our Amazon, Global Furniture Group, and Mars Pet Care. And we have close to 100 other sponsors that really do make our work possible here at the Civic Design Center. So if you would like to be interested in becoming a sponsor, there's ways to do that online. We also have individual memberships. So we want to give you an opportunity to become engaged as an individual. And there's ways that you can do that as well. So we'd love to encourage you to become involved. So tonight, I'm really excited to welcome our esteemed panel of guest experts here. We have Mary Boskelly, who is a partner and owner of Huntington Architects. We have Latha Gilkale, who is a author and also an advocate and passionate about public spaces and gardening and farming in the city. And we have Jessica Dolphine, who is Executive Director CEO of the Transit Alliance in Tennessee. And they're each going to introduce themselves a little bit more in depth. And this is this is the part 2 of a 4-part series beginning each month through April. We are taking our guiding principles of our organization, which there are 12 of them now. We just updated them. And each month we're focusing on 3 different principles with 3 experts. So we'll take one of those principles and discuss how their work or their passion encapsulates that particular principle. And we'll have a lively discussion afterwards. And for those in the audience, we're going to get a chance to, after the program ends, to talk even more here in person. So please stay tuned for the next 2 parts of these, which will be coming later this month in March and in April. If you have any online or in-person audience, you can use these for Twitter and for the Instagram or whatever other social media you're using. And also right now, if you're using your phone, you can, oops, this is wait for me. You can take an image of this and go to the 12 principles page on our website, where you can follow along a little bit more depth on each one of the principles and the corresponding goals. So with that, Mary has the pleasure to get started with, is this on timer? I'm sorry, it seems to be moving a little bit. Okay, so the category that we're talking about tonight is foundation. And if you had a chance to participate in the first one, it was about representation, which is the fact that people's voices should be represented in all the projects in the work. So today we're talking about the foundation, we'll be building on the fact that community is part of that conversation, but foundation are really principles and aspects of design that if you don't get these right, then everything else in the future is really not going to be possible. It's going to be really hard to go back and do the plan. So an incredibly important aspect of civic design in the city. So with that, we'll get started on our first principle, which is the founder. Sorry. Yep. And that one is, I'll read it for you, Mary, to get started with. Organize community plans with sightlines that feature landmarks and natural assets to improve functionality and civic design. And you can see underneath there the some of the goals that correspond with that. And I'll turn it over to Mary, and remember to give a little bit of a better introduction to yourself than I gave.
All right, I'm Mary Roskilly, partner and principal with Tuckington Architects. I have been in Nashville, moved from Cleveland, Ohio in 1994, and really was part of Nashville, the urban design forums, Plan of Nashville, and kind of remember Nashville kind of becoming more of a cultural destination, not just country, but a little more cultural. Our firms worked on a lot of kind of civic and cultural projects in Nashville, and really have morphed with what Nashville needs. Now we're doing a lot of bars and distilleries and office buildings, where before we were doing parks and museums, kind of morphing with what Nashville needs and taking cues from that. So my foundation pillar really relates to sight lines, setting up sight lines, and there are kind of 4 components to, let me see if I have this right. There we go. So foundation pillar is what we're here to talk about. Specifically, I'm talking about sight lines today. The sight lines principle or foundation talks about organizing community plans with sight lines that feature landmarks and natural assets to improve the functionality and civic identity of the city. And then there's 4 pieces you can see under there that are kind of components that reinforce this sightlines principle. I'm going to touch on some of those as I go through some projects here. And since the graphic that is used right here to demonstrate the sightlines principle is the Bicentennial Mall, I thought this would be a good one to start off with. This is one of the very first projects I had the pleasure of working on with Ken Hinton, who's here in the office also, the lead designer on this Bicentennial Mall park. And one of the parameters that this helps reinforce related to sightlines is that reinforcing that landmarks are really reinforcing and reflecting the values of a community. So that's a lot of what this Bicentennial Mall basically does, is set up sightlines to the Capitol that you can see at the top of the hill, and even from the bottom right-hand picture that you see when you're up at the Capitol and looking back out at the mall. It's really that view from the Capitol and seeing this grand park, and they're really giving the importance to the Capitol as a place in Nashville and where a lot of good decisions get made. And so giving it something that is much more appropriate to the Capitol, reinforcing that. The Bicentennial Mall was also set up with parameters that let an organization that set the framework. Gary mentioned or you're trying to do something that really doesn't screw it up for the future. So you're setting up a framework that allows other buildings to be built that can be celebrated as they kind of work, sort of like the mall in Washington, D.C. You create a plaza, a place where these really grand projects have a space that is deserving of the type of architecture, the type of building. So one of the projects that was also completed just last year, I think, or not, just about a year ago, the Tennessee State Library and Archives, that is up near the Carillon at the kind of top of the mall, or north end of the mall. And then on the other side is the Tennessee State Museum. So this park really created a framework for some additional civic buildings. There's plenty of extra room around it for other important buildings to be constructed over time. So re-emphasizing the sight lines to both the buildings, the Capitol, and then really helps reflect what the importance is of these landmarks in the city. Another park that our firm also worked on, this is the Public Square Park down by the courthouse. And the top picture in the left-hand corner, this is a picture of the courthouse after it opened, when really there was a public square. It served as a public square, it was a gathering place. The bottom left-hand picture is what it was back in, I don't know, 2003. It was a parking lot. People did a lot of tailgating at that location before going over the Titans games. And then really turning it back into a park in 2006 that gave a civic presence to Public Square Park. And then one of the other principles that is related to sightlines is tying to natural features, use to natural features. And from the founders building in the upper right-hand corner, it's an observation platform. You can go up and have a view down to the river, understand how the Cumberland River was really important to the foundation of Nashville as a city. So that connection, history that you see up in there's lots of historic panels that tell you the history of the city and connecting to the Cumberland River. Another, skip one. And then this is a project actually we're working on right now. This is in Edge Hill. This is a project, so a lot of the parks and civic projects trying to take this down to a more granular level of a neighborhood. This is a 7-acre site in North Edge Hill, right on the other side of the gulch. For this project, we were trying to look at an element of this sightlines is also looking at transportation. How do you tie to the grid of transportation and connect to that? This project is looking at how do you reinforce. We did research on the existing street grids that went through before the interstate that got kind of bisected by the interstate between the Gulch and Edge Hill. How do you weave that back in, create a network of streets that allows views to downtown still, not creating what some of the buildings you see in Nashville right now that kind of almost put blinders on so you don't have views of downtown, and really looking to make sure you have peaks to downtown, green space and things these guys may talk about also is that ability to get outside with a park, connection to a greenway, something that came from the plan of Nashville as an idea to connect on the interstate side over there. So really trying how do we do this at a different level of, got lost one slide in there. We can skip to that, but I didn't see that slide. That's okay. So anyway, that is really looking at different levels. How you nature was one of the other one. So my point on the convention side, as a civic building. You need to have that back.
Just let me finish.
Yeah.
Just the interest slide.
Okay, but with the convention center, the new convention center, really making that an iconic piece that lines up with streets and connects street grids through there. And then because you don't have a lot of nature in the downtown area, looking at that with the green roof, that it becomes something that people look down and making sure you understand that a lot of people see that building from up above, and it's not just the four sides of the building that you see when you drive past, but in most, I mean, we have a lot of hotels and buildings that are coming up much taller and looking down and bringing that little element of greenery and nature into downtown, reflecting the hills around Middle Tennessee.
A lot of really iconic buildings that address these topics here. So thank you. Okay, we will move on to the next one, which is provide health promoting features that respond to neighborhood actions. You can see.
I'm Lethico.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm Lethico. I'm going to be talking about foundations in our built environment that promote health. And in particular, I wanted to focus on one type of foundation that I've been involved with, and that's setting aside green spaces for urban gardening. As a physician and a gardener, I've learned that these two vocations, medicine and gardening, have gone together since the time of Hippocrates, father of medicine, who famously said, "Let food be thy medicine, and medicine thy food." So it turns out that physicians, the earliest physicians, tended their own herb gardens, and these herb gardens were our earliest medicine cabinets. While gardening by itself is a great endeavor, I think when you set aside urban spaces for growing food, what we're doing is maximizing or optimizing all the benefits of gardening. And that optimization characteristic happens to be a desirable trait of any foundation. So if you think about the health of an individual, it's always going to be an interplay between genetics and lifestyles. If you're familiar with Dan Buettner's work on the blue zones, you know that he identified 9 common threads amongst individuals who not only lived into their 90s and 100s, but they did so with far fewer chronic illnesses like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and dementia. And out of these 9 common factors that Dan Buettner identified, you think of things common. When you think of health, you commonly think of things like physical activity, plant-based diet, reduction of stress. But something that's often overlooked is social connectedness. And that social connectedness happens to be a really strong theme in all of the blue zones that he looked at. And this is also something that's supported by work done by Dr. Julianne Holt-Lundstedt. And what she found was that social isolation or that feeling of loneliness can significantly reduce the lifespan to the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So that's something that we need to consider when we consider foundations or anything that we're doing in a city. Think of how we can increase that social connectedness into all of our developments. I was going to say, it's my belief that when you set aside a network of multiple spaces for growing food, what you're doing is you're increasing social connectedness. You're bringing neighbors together with a shared common purpose. And that common purpose results in more meaningful human connection, as well as increasing an individual's connection with their community. So these spaces can be privately or publicly owned, or a combination of the two. It can be something as small as a raised bed in a parking lot or a schoolyard. They can be rooftop gardens. They can be underutilized spaces like river floodplains. So anywhere we can think of growing food, it would be wonderful to have this connection that allows people to connect. Here in Nashville, we have 2 great examples, even in our local parks, Warner Parks, as well as Millridge Park, have spaces set aside for growing food. And with that, I want to introduce you to the community garden that I've been involved with for the past 11 years. It's a garden that was started by MBHA in 2010. I've been fortunate to both garden and volunteer. We're going to do a slideshow and go join you.
Passion is the thing that defines you. Focus your energy to drive through the ups and downs. The good will come around. Perennial growth is inside you. Believe in every moment and decide it with consideration of what is highest. A value to the whole, a vision of the goal. To balance it all, so the light win. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the worst of times, it was the best. Truth is, it's all in your mind. Life's exactly what you design. It was the worst of times, it was the best of times. It was the best of times, it was the worst. Truth is, it's all in your mind. Life's exactly what you design. Passion is the thing that defines you. Focus your energy to drive through the ups and downs. The good will come around. Perennial growth is inside you. Believe in every moment and decide it with consideration of what is highest. A value to the whole, a vision of the goal. To balance it all, so the light win. Lightning striking every moment. Live your life upon your toes and be ready, be ready, be ready, be ready for everything you ever wanted. Comes from hard work and love. To fight, to fight, to fight, to fight the cause of darkness inside you, banging on your brain, making you feel like you're going insane. Everything is everything, so every day you wake up, embrace every moment that you're in and out of touch. Cause passion is the thing that defines you. Focus your energy to drive through the ups and downs. The good will come around. Perennial growth is inside you. celebration of what is highest. A value to the whole, a vision of the goal. To balance it all so the light win. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the worst of times, it was the best. Truth is, it's all in your mind. Life's exactly what you design. It was the best of times, it was the best of times. It was the best of times, it was the best. Truth is, it's all in your mind. Life's exactly how you define. It was the best.
As far as like individual events, we have 50 gardeners at least every year, and then we have lots of people coming in. This garden is a community effort. You don't have a community garden without a community, and it's pretty much in and out. And we've been really fortunate that even with COVID-19, these past 2 years, we've been able to continue.
Just curious, who else been to the farm in the city? And we'll do a tour for members.
Would love that.
Okay,
I
great.
love that.
Okay, and then our third principle is develop an equitable and desirable transportation infrastructure. So Jessica, what do you think?
Excellent, thank you for inviting Transit Alliance to speak to this. This is the first time we'll have. Although after that video, I'm really hungry. This fruits and vegetables look great. Let's get into it. I'm gonna say it first. Individual freedoms are directly tied to mobility. Let's see. So here's what I mean by equity, right? I'm sure that many of us have seen that. But I just wanted to start with that so we get an idea of what I'm driving at. As the region continues to grow in population, you can see the census 2010 numbers versus 2020. And every single county in the 10-county Middle Tennessee region is going up. Some of them more significantly than others. It is the work of the Transit Alliance to build awareness and support for funding multimodal regional transportation infrastructure. So who needs transportation? 100% of everyone. Rural, suburban, urban, ex-urban, young, old, in between, right? Families, the necessity of transportation spans race, age, geography, physical ability, you name it. It is the foundation of a modern life. But not all transportation modes were created equal, right? For so many of us, it's a matter of grabbing our keys and heading out the door. I mean, issues of paying for gas and parking aside, there are relatively few challenges for some of us. So a lot of those with cars understand the need of funding transportation projects for facilitation of vehicle driving, but what about facilitating public transit and that infrastructure? It's a little more of a tougher sell, right? So who rides transit? Nationwide, over 60% of those riding public transit are people of color. And I think that holds true for Nashville as well. So we have to recognize that funding robust transit systems of buses and trains, and even greenways, sidewalks, hawk signals, the entire system works together, correct, is critical to allowing everyone to access that economy that's growing in our big city. It's undeniable. Although right now, I will say this. Funding for improved and enhanced transportation infrastructure, including public transit, is no better off than it was in 2018. Just this past year, we got back up to funding at 2018 level for the city of Nashville. So as a city growing and a region growing at the rates that we are, that should be unacceptable. Not just to me leading the Transit Alliance of Middle Tennessee,
but to the majority of us. Because if you want to access the beautiful amenities of our city that Mary was talking about, you have to be able to get there. If you want to get to a community garden, you have to be able to get there. If you want to access any of the robust colleges that we have in our city, you have to be able to get there and access these amenities and resources. Sometimes we just need to be reminded that in order, what is it? Sorry, it's a quote. I have to get it right. The best way to predict the future is to create it. Right? Thank you, Abraham Lincoln, for that one. So tonight, I'm hoping that I can ignite a spark in you, whether you're here or joining us online, about the importance and vitality, the vital nature that transportation plays in each of our lives. Currently, we do have a big challenge because nothing is a better barometer of a city's priorities than its transportation system, because it is foundational. Right? So does our city offer equitable access to the boon of our growing city? Right? Does it offer equitable access? Wait, that doesn't that. Does it connect workforce to higher earning jobs conveniently and affordably? Is it funded intentionally with a plan for continually enhancing this infrastructure? After nearly 5 years of driving home this message, it feels a little disappointing to be where we are today, like where I just said, back to square one. We're back to 2018 funding levels. There starts to grow a sense of hopelessness and helplessness inside of me as someone who is like totally passionate about it. And I forgot to bio myself. Let me just insert that right quick. I was born and raised in Middle Tennessee. I was born in what was called Baptist, now it's St. Thomas Midtown. Okay, as was my mom and my dad. My dad took a public bus to Hume-Quag High School every day during his high school career. I grew up in South Union County, Peter and Kingston Springs. I could not access a single thing unless someone drove me. Period. Right? I have a stake in this region. I have a stake in its growth. And I hope to see that as it addresses the issue of transportation, it gets it right. Back to my other soapbox. So these feelings of hopelessness and helplessness, I started to say, why do I show up? Why do I give feedback when it's met with a smile but not used in a meaningful way? I never see it reflected in a plan. I have to think that I'm not the only one that feels that way. So as these voices who feel ignored start to drop off, they become even further isolated and left out of the planning process. So where are they? Where are their voices in the city? They're even further left behind and lacking access as we continue to build and grow, because this building and developing is not stopping, right? Since 2019, we have broken our development and building year over year, even during the pandemic. And this brings me to, I saw your first urban design forum in late January, right, about representation. And there was something that Ed Henley from Pillars Development said, and Lauren Fitzgerald with Jump Nashville brought up together, this idea of collective power. And they said it, that if we don't learn from our history, we are doomed to repeat it. Okay? So I want to iterate tonight that historically speaking, transportation projects have generational consequences, period. And we have to recognize that. Okay. Historically, those projects have not been very kind to working class neighborhoods or neighborhoods predominantly of Black and Brown populations. All right. I have a link that I'm sure that Veronica will share with you. It's interactive and you can look at it. It's hosted by the Tennessee State Archives, called Mapping the Destruction of African American Neighborhoods. One of those, there's 4 neighborhoods outlined in that ArcGIS mapping system, and you can look at the Jefferson Street, where I-40 cut through it like a wrecking ball, irreparably damaging a vibrant neighborhood full of businesses and music that we're still living out today. So generational consequences come with transportation infrastructure, which is why it needs to be equitable and desirable. Let's see. Today, access to our economy is pretty much exclusive to those with a personal vehicle, which costs bargain basement about $10,000 a year. It hasn't always been that way. Nashville was founded on, this is kind of leading up to the interstate building right there, that photo. And I got these from archives. But we used to be a trolley city, right? Which in and of itself also had issues with equity. Let's see, what year was it? In 1905, the state legislature segregated the trolley system. So the African American Union built its own steam trolley and operated for 2 years until 1907 on Church Street. So again, I'll go back to my original statement that individual freedoms are directly tied to mobility. So the way Nashville approaches this transportation and transit challenges will be how it defines our future, not just for us, but for our future generations. Wait, did I say that? No, I did it twice for that. So part of this investment thesis comes in the form of how we design our infrastructure. So right now we're in the process of looking at building a North Nashville Transit Center for WeGo, right? And part of that feedback from the community is, guess what? They want it to be desirable. It's permanent infrastructure. It's going to be big and in their neighborhood. They want it to be well lit, feel safe, be well maintained, right? Everything we would all desire. Shocker. As a foundation, right? They want it to reflect their community. And sure, we can look to other cities to see who's doing this well. We can look to Charlotte, North Carolina, Indianapolis, Indiana, Austin, Texas, Denver, Colorado. I won't even go into the legacy cities of New York and Chicago. They are envisioning transportation working for more people than what has traditionally been working for. So looking outside of the commuter. Who is using transit and why? Where are they going? What are they accessing? More than that, we're putting serious dollars behind building the projects in those plans. And they have dedicated funding to build it, which we do not. But I'll say this, we can study other cities, but we need to focus and concentrate on ours. We have a myriad of plans and studies that have been done over the years that are collecting dust because they do not have the funding or the will to build them. And that's what we're missing. We need to build this infrastructure desirably and equitably to meet our needs of today and into the future. Doing the same thing that we've always done, expecting a different result, is not the way forward. We need to take bold steps and break from the roller coaster of the past, right, and make a change. So in a nutshell, Nashville's current funding situation for transit for infrastructure is wholly insufficient to truly build equitable access to the growing economy. We need public transit funding for the 21st century that centers people and its communities, but that also works for businesses. So no matter where you live or how much money you make, if you live in Nashville, you have access to safe, reliable, and accessible public transit that can facilitate your access to the rising tides. Because even if we are not ready for the day, it cannot always be night. Thank you, Kanye West.
Yeah, I mean, the last event that we went to 2 years ago in DC, you and I were invited to go to an transportation
Yes.
summit and forum, and I think that just can't be repeated enough how Nashville is growing so much, but we are lagging behind in such an important way with funding here locally.
Oh
So
my gosh,
we'll-
there are slides that you can see where we are totally behind all of our bigger cities and per capita funding for transportation.
Right, it's one of the most fundamental, I think that and housing, we kind of recognize that, and actually housing was a principle that we added to the 10 principles because it was not explicitly really addressed in the original 10 principles, because housing affordability was not the issue 20 years ago in Nashville. That it's just changed so much. So building on a lot of what you said, Jessica, about the community voice in the transportation area, I just want to give our other panelists a chance to maybe reflect on what you see the role of representation, community voices in your particular principal area that we talked about.
Well, I think a lot of projects I kind of shared today have a civic and a cultural element. I think that last project in North Edgeshell is more about what the community is saying is reflective of the community. I think as we get into this, all communities need to be reflected, whether it's in transportation or, you know, connectivity of social means, and then highlighting what's important in that community. I think we talk a lot about displacement of people as things come in, their culture gets displaced, or their housing is less affordable housing. I think that so for me, some of these principles related to sightlines, I think years ago we were focused on civic and cultural, and now those foundational principles need to really translate to the community and help celebrate each individual community. Set the big picture, now make sure that those same principles carry to the smaller communities, so we can see as we drive through or walk through or bike through or bus through different areas, what is important to those specific areas to really kind of reflect all of that stuff.
Particularly Edgeville, which is the community staff is also really impacted by the intersection.
That's right. That's right.
And is experiencing this closeness to the voice of what's needed locally.
And I think having community meetings and understanding and not just coming and saying, this is the solution I think we need, but really listening to people and what they want in that particular community. The neighbor said, we want a place our kids can walk to work at the grocery store. We want a grocery store because we can't get to the grocery store, or I'm working, you know, too many hours to be able to, when do I get to the grocery store? And just really listening to those people that really, I mean, have not been listened to a lot over the years. And so trying to have that community do the things that it needs to, but the people that have been there for a long time and don't want to be pushed out.
What are the thoughts from community engagement from a community perspective?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, luckily, these things kind of evolve naturally. We kind of bring people together for a shared purpose as community gardening. And it's wonderful to actually see it in action almost every day. I mean, I've been a gardener my whole life, but the whole idea of bringing it to a community and actually having people come together there's just always an exchange of ideas. And that builds a social connections, I believe. And it also, it's just a great educational tool. You can't really learn gardening without actually putting your hands in the dirt. And when you're surrounded by other people who may have totally diverse opinions, and we're really fortunate at the location that NBHA started this garden, is that there are people coming in from all different parts of Nashville, as well as the local areas. And with that diversity of opinions, people learn that there isn't just one way of doing anything. And I think that's the whole idea behind anything that we do. When we have a diversity of opinions, we tend to come up with something brand new, and it's a synthesis. And I believe a synthesis that works more for everyone as opposed to just one person coming up with their own idea and pushing something forward.
Do we have Any questions from the audience? Let's open up to them.
I have an observation about transportation. It seems like driverless cars are on the way. Okay, and I've seen this in China and a couple other places where smaller buses, not the big long WeGo things, smaller buses, not like the electric ones they have in Chattanooga, run up and down the streets. They don't have drivers, and there are lots of them. So you don't wait 30 minutes for the next bus because it shows up, goes on. It's kind of like a modern day trolley, but maybe it's something that is privately owned or some public-private relationship. Because you can see these things. If I knew that I could get from Vanderbilt downtown and go from Vanderbilt, say out the Bicentennial Mall and then Jefferson Street, whatever, and these things are kind of running all the time, it's kind of like a modern subway. I just wondered if that is being, and to mention the fact that regardless what we think, flying cars are going to show up. Flying taxis are showing up. They're going to show up, and we're going to deal with them like people did 100 years ago, stunned that they're going overhead. But so anyway, I'm tossing a lot out.
Yeah, well, transit lines is mode agnostic, I'll say that. I'm not advocating for one mode over another. I'm just saying that better funding is needed to address the current transportation challenge that we are having. So I would say this about autonomous buses: they're going to cost more, or at least the same amount as the buses as we have now. And again, that comes back to the funding conundrum. Like, we're not going to get any improvements until we improve the funding.
What's the, I mean, this may seem like a simple question, but it's really complex, but what are we missing here with funding? I mean, what's the process to make it happen? This question I have is, what happens when infrastructure does not support foundational civic design? It seems like we have that issue in front of us. We don't have the funding.
Yeah.
The funding does not lead to foundational transportation support for us here.
That is the billion-dollar question, right? We had the Lexington National Plan. It was a 15-year transportation plan that was going to cost like $6 billion, but to build out and then go up to $9 billion over the course of its life, which was way too high. But chipping in $8 million for a new stadium maybe is not so high. So I think it comes down to city priorities, honestly, and the leadership taking that bold step and saying, we have got to pay for this, right? And a large part of leadership coming out and taking that bold step is that community voice. They have to hear from the constituents that it's important to them, right? But 80% of Nashvilleans and those in middle Tennessee drive our own car. So we're not immediately thinking, oh, we really need to focus on funding transit, because we are complaining about being stuck in traffic, right?
Well, I think we've all seen changes in transportation during COVID that we probably liked, with fewer traffic jams. So
You
maybe
say that,
maybe-
but the past like 2 weeks, every time I get in my car, I'm
Well,
stuck
that's
in a
what I'm
traffic jam
yes.
on 40.
Yes.
I'm gonna say, Jessica, I feel like this is an opportunity. I'm new to Nashville. The first thing everyone always says is, oh my God, the traffic's so horrible. I can't believe it's summer. I feel like this is the PR twist that we need, which is that if we had decent public transportation, we could get some of those cars off the road and ease up the traffic jams for everyone else. I feel like that's a PR leverage point that could say, well, even if you don't think you're going to take public transportation, I mean, if there was good public transportation, they would, but even if you don't think you're going to use it, maybe it'll still make your life better by easing up the
I
traffic.
want to respond to that real quick, because I think we've had some discussion lately. I think because we tried that years ago in Nashville, and Nashville voted it down intensely on some of this stuff. And so there's a lot of discussion, oh, all these people moving to Nashville, like you, right? Like, oh, let's keep Nashville, and like, look, all these outsiders coming in. I think that's what it's going to take, is people coming from different places with different perspectives to say, we expect this from a city like Nashville. Because I think there's a certain set in Nashville that they're happy in their car, they don't want to change. And so I think one of the positives, whether it's politically or it's funding different things, we're getting different voices into Nashville. And I think if we can work together and educate people and talk about priorities, some of these things that we've been hesitant to do over the years might actually happen because we're getting some different voices in. So I don't know, that's my look on kind of all the new energy coming into the city, is that hopefully it can maybe be enough of a, group to, swing things a little bit.
The scooters were a curveball in the city, big time. Nobody saw them coming. They took over the downtown. They worked. They had some problems. And it could be that mass transportation may be a type of scooter. Who knows?
Just to dovetail off that, electric bicycle sales have gone up by 280% since COVID started. But currently our greenways as an initiative banned them. So how do you deal with conflicts as far as creating transportation opportunities for local transportation, as in i.e. electric bicycles that I get from my house to downtown in rush hour traffic in 10 minutes by taking greenways and bike lanes, but now greenways wants to ban electric bicycles from the greenways. So it's going to inhibit your cause if greenways does that. It's going to kneecap you guys and go and create more transportation. So I wanted to see how you felt about the whole initiative to ban electric bikes from greenways.
I think where it is right now is, class 1 and 2 are legal on greenways. Yes. Right. It's the class 3, I think that's in question.
Is it a higher speed?
It's, yeah, I think higher speed.
Well, it's the class 3s have a throttle. I mean, they're sort of a scootery thing.
You just need to go slower.
Class 1 and 2 are just pedal assist. You have to pedal. So you can't really go faster on class 1 and 2.
Unless you're faking it.
But I have a class 3, so that's why.
Yeah.
That's why. Yeah, again, the organization I represent is mode agnostic. We just want to see better funding and increase awareness about how important it is that we have these conversations, right? You're engaged, you have a class 3 bicycle. I mean, that's great. I will say this, greenways are an essential network piece in the overall transportation system, right? It's safe, it's reliable, and it's available. So we have to have those greenways, and I'm loving that Nashville is such a great greenway system. But I will say this, in 1992 and 94, when council first started talking about building the first greenway, by Lanny, there was some push back. Nobody wanted a greenway in Nashville.
That's
Right.
right. That's right.
Now everybody.
And now everybody
Same with roundabouts.
wants. So there is a certain amount of, if you build it, they will come. Right? The same thing happens, it's called induced demand, and you build an extra highway lane. Yes, you free up a lane of traffic for all of about 6 months, and then boom, you're gonna stop traffic again. Because it fills up. You build it, people will use it.
Sidewalks in Green Hills, that are, 20 years ago, no one felt
No
like
one
you're
would.
walking in Green Hills, but see, things can change. So I feel this is gonna be the last question. Thanks for that. Well, 10 minutes. Okay, 10 more. So I'm gonna go to something a little bit more lighthearted with some of our axial relationships in the city. So in the plan of Nashville, there were we looked at each direction. So there's the bicentennial wall is already finished. So and then we have the one from State Capitol to the library, which is a very beautiful relationship. We looked to the east from the Capitol towards the river, and there was a big building blocking it. But the bones were there. And so you look back into the book and there's a drawing for continuing that access all the way to the river, some sort of monument on the waterfront. And then lo and behold, the city tore down the, a building that was blocking away, and the next building came along and created a space there for that viewpoint to continue. So I'm just curious, do you have thoughts on future Axel?
I didn't give you this question.
This is all
Yeah, a minute.
You're the expert, so.
I don't know. We've had a discussion driving by Adventure Science Center. I don't know, there are some things that have been lost from there, but I think some of these where you're getting further from the city, I don't know that I have a good answer for you. But it's
Or anybody
becoming,
else that
but
knows
it's
somebody
becoming,
drive around.
yeah, it's becoming more obvious of certain things that we're starting to lose. And, I don't know, I feel like Cam would have an answer on this.
I feel like the driving in from I-6, but, do you think of sightlines from the interstate perspective too? But driving in from I-65 and the building that was built that blocks the view of downtown, it's.
Yes.
Pretty wretched.
Anybody, I'll open this audience, anybody have a wish list view that you want to, would like to see happen?
Well, Capitol View development, which is west of the Capitol, destroyed a vista to the state capitol, in the western part of the city. That should not have happened. That a development is a good development full of great things. It's called Capitol View, and it does exactly the opposite.
Yeah, and I think
Actually, all of
that's
those
one of the.
buildings have the view to Capitol. So that was the point there.
Oh, yeah, you had it right.
And the
Yeah,
Civic
it's
Design
not
Center had
happening.
a really good vision of what should have been there. Keith Covington did the drawing. It's a remarkable drawing showing the visual access to the Capitol so that everybody would have that visual access to the Capitol from the west. That's gone.
I mentioned prior to this, I'm in leadership in Nashville right now. We talk a lot about some of the big issues the city is facing, whether it's affordable housing or access to, food and different things like that. And it's overwhelming the amount of development coming into the city. And we were just talking last week about the plan of Nashville, the Nashville Next, and different things that have tried to set down those priorities. And I really feel like it's time again to stop and say, when we drive around Nashville, I don't even know what's being built. It used to be that we could say, here's this building, describe it, we do the architect, the developer, the contractor. You turn a corner and there's a brand new building there. And so I don't know if who's the keeper of that. Does the Civic Design Center need to do another one of those? Like, what are the things that we need to document right now? Because I think people are moving so fast that it's,
I feel like that's.
or don't know. There are so many different plans and so many different voices in Nashville that have priorities. It is hard for a developer or a design team to say, what is most important and what am I gonna listen to? Because there's a ton of information. It's a lot. We were talking about when the plan of Nashville was done, 800 people participated. That seems like a tiny little number right now, compared to where we are and how many voices there are in Nashville. And I felt also back then, it felt a little more unifying and that people were like, yes, it's important to preserve this or preserve that. And now there's a few more differing opinions on what's important.
Tell them what Steve said about why we need to do this. Remember what he said?
I don't recall.
He said everybody was, a lot of architects were not real busy at the time.
Oh, yeah.
So they worked on the plan of Nashville, which has no legal teeth. And so he suggested that maybe we need another recession so people be available so we can slow down and rethink it.
We've had a lot of those.
We should, but Nashville didn't really slow down that much in 2020. We kept going, so we didn't have that natural pause. I think we thought, we even at the office, like, oh gosh, we got a couple weeks off. I'm gonna work on that office standards thing or whatever, and it kept going.
I think that's the problem, is we kept going and nobody was talking to each other and just barreling through ideas and putting up walls.
Yeah, you
and
couldn't get
barriers.
together during that time where in past recessions, you're like, sure, let's get together and have a beer and talk about ideas for the city. So.
Yeah, okay, this is, hopefully blending in some of the public realm. But you mentioned something very kind of triggered this in my brain. We talked about food access and food accessibility. Nashville struggling with a lot of directions, particularly around downtown with food service. And a lot of developments now, the community, from the community aspect, when we talk about representation, they're asking for specific uses to be placed inside of some of these developments, which is really a challenge. Are you asking the development team, the design team, to recruit a specific vendor or service? That's really difficult to do. It's illegal for the city to do that. But think about what you had presented to us and talk about the importance of access to open space and green space. And the city is really starting to see a change in terms of how green space is starting to work its way into development. That value is starting to be seen. So I wonder if there's a way to catalyze the design community to advocate for gardens inside of these green spaces, like create that as almost a design standard, at least a highly valued asset to some of these communities. Because I hear, communities, week in, week out, say, when we get a grocery store, right? And early 2016, we need more income, right? You need more income, and then they look around and they're like, well, there's a lot more roofs and a lot more people are making a lot more money, we still don't get the grocery store. And so I'm just curious, is there a way to almost shift that from expecting an outside entity to bring people, and again, taking charge and being that out to say, we can create more healthy and natural food options, and almost programming opportunities for farmers market. So at least there's access to a food source that they can provide.
I love that question, because it's something I think about every single day. Because to me, there is enough food on this planet to feed about 1.5 times over. It's not a question, is there enough food? And the whole point of growing food, I think, is just to kind of help you realize how, it can be done. It's a way of taking charge yourself instead of waiting for someone else on the outside to come and do it for you. So I've been thinking about this over and over again. How do you get developers to incorporate this? And every single development could have a dedicated space to growing food. And all I can say is Amazon is now committing itself to, I think, building about 20,000 new homes, affordable homes. Why can't every single one of these affordable homes have an area to grow? It's possible. It's just somebody has to just kind of advocate for it. And I think, just being here and just saying this is something we can do is a start, and that's why it can't be done.
So I actually recall the day some of the kids from the Henry Hale community walked into the garden and they saw okra growing on the plants. That's the first time in their lives they had seen how okra actually grows. And my wife was sitting there, told them they could actually eat the raw okra come off the plant because they're baby sized. And they're like, I can eat this, I don't have to cook this, and and when they ate it, like, wow. And same with strawberries and tomatoes and all the stuff that's going there. So it's not just the ability to grow your own food, but to understand where food arrives, not through a supermarket, not through some processed way, but from your backyard, from your front yard, from your neighbors. I think that's very, very powerful, that relationship that at that young age that kids can make to food, I think will serve them throughout their lives later on.
So, and to answer your question, I think it can be done, and it should be done, and will be done. I think when people think about growing food, they think, oh, I've got to get a bunch of acres and I've got to plant all this stuff. Really, it can just be really small. And I even advocate for one plant on a deck, all these balconies that you see coming up all over national or rooftops. You can have one plant for, I think I mentioned having raised bed in a parking lot. When you have wide open parking spaces, I just see it as an amazing space to just have a raised bed so you don't have to worry about the soil contaminants. Put a plant in there. Everybody who comes in and parks in those spaces can bring home, from home, some gray water. They can have a jug in their car, water those plants. It's there for everybody. access. And I think it's also just that idea that once you see food growing, you realize that you have the ability to do it yourself. And so.
There was a project in Wedgewood, Houston that had planter boxes designed into the facade of the building. To
Yeah.
give people.
Just anywhere and everywhere.
Like this little square foot garden.
I don't know if the plans are still alive, but I do, I mean, I'm gonna pay attention next time I go back. Because I think, related to Ed on that, I think the planning department, we've had some conversation with the planning department about what are some of the tools they would like to have to be able to, I don't know, tools to say, okay, developer, if you put a green space in, which there is that, if you put a green space or you have certain things that they get rewarded with bonus height, or there's other things that allow you to get more because you're giving something back. I think as the planning department looks to update that, and they're also looking to other cities of what are, what works elsewhere, but the idea of understanding it's not just something you gotta weed and what, and it's bringing a different benefit, it's a social benefit. It's bringing food, but it's a social benefit too. Those things that weave into those documents that the developers actually do read. They don't always read the plan of Nashville or Nashville Next, but they have to read certain development documents and go in front of the planning commission and all that to get approvals when they're trying to get something more. So let's make sure the things that are important get into those documents, is something we want to accomplish.
I have a big problem with all the grass we have. So after World War II, everybody wanted to be the king of the castle. And all this grass everywhere that we have, wherever we go, is a real biodiversity problem in my perspective. You could grow so many things and gardens would be better than grass.
To focus on something Mary said also earlier about the meeting, I mean, there is an aesthetics component to this, and I think that's been why we've had so many policies put in place where people can't necessarily grow in some of the developments that they live in. I mean, I know for a fact that it's an actual rule, but when you think about it, we spend more than $1 billion a year on lawn care and maintenance.
It's just
Some of
horrible.
that money can be funneled into growing food. There is no reason why that can be done, especially now that there's been a recent lawsuit saying that Roundup causes.
I mean,
like,
it's-
I think that should actually advocate or help the cause of saying, let's stop spending some of this money into trying to keep these perfect lawns and grow food instead. But it needs to be an organized effort. You can't just let everyone just start doing whatever, obviously, for many reasons. Then we'll be back to square one for people say, hey, this looks awful, we need to.
Along those lines, the triangle in East Nashville, right in front of the high school, the Civic Design Center had put in some raised beds with the, the galvanized containers, and they were more decorative, I think, in the beginning, but then they became unsightly. So I thought, well, I'm gonna go, like, just weed them and put some herbs from my garden in there that I knew survived in this climate and all of that. So I had some rosemary, and then the people in the spring would put out their irises, and so we'd start putting those in, but just to make it look pretty again. And now because I'm only here half the year, and I was taking care of it, I was trying to get people to from the neighborhood to do more. Well, now there's food in those bins. There's choke cherries, there's tomatillos, there's more herbs, there's sunflowers. And a lot of the neighborhood, I think, has seen that they can just do it. I mean, they just go and they're doing it on their own. But it's really hard, the watering aspect there is hard to do. So it is something that needs to be organized.
There's no reason why we don't have a watering truck go around. I mean, all the big cities have watering trucks to maintain their outdoor plants. I mean, if you go to Chicago, you'll see a water truck go around. In New York City, same thing.
Yeah.
So yes, some of that money that is being used for Roundup can be used for a water truck.
My sister is up in Ohio, and she works for the Soil and Water Conservation District. Her job is education. She goes out and she works with groups to put in rain gardens, teach people how to make rain barrels, talk about native plants, and that grass is just green pavement. And that whole, the thought that if you put in native plants, you don't need to water as much, they're made to be here, go get something. And so really understanding whether it's the city or it's your garden, what do you really need, what's gonna thrive here, and how do you not force something that's, like trying to make something happen as, for something specific, doesn't really maybe belong in that area. So I think that's great, but getting people to realize that it doesn't have to be just green, it can be plants that look a little more natural and wild, and it doesn't have to be completely manicured. I think that's an education thing, and getting people to see that it's done successfully, and it brings butterflies and bees and, different things like that, really help in a lot of different areas, and then for food, so all that stuff is great.
I think our next reclaiming public space project should be like these micro gardens all across the city. So because just showing people that you can do it, because I think you might not realize that if there's a small patch of land, like that's
Right.
potential for
Right.
things. Okay, we are down to our last minute, so I'm going to just give this one last opportunity. I think I'll know what we'll all say, but in the coming year, the cohorts that we're having for all these 4 sessions are going to be, they're all rock stars. And so we want to make sure that we're going to be capturing energy and excitement from this moving forward. But in the coming year, what would be your just wish list? Maybe 1 or 2 things as parting thoughts for what you'd like to see happen. And we'll start with Jessica.
Well, I'm gonna say just something.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I know exactly what you're gonna say.
If you don't know already, Nashville Metro is started its budget preseason situation next Tuesday. As a matter of fact, individuals and companies and organizations can go and give public comment about what they want to see in the budget. This is, I think, the first time our Metro Council has done this particular hearing, public hearing on budget. So if you have a particular proclivity toward a budgeting and transportation, please go and give public comment. You have up to 2 minutes. It is first come, first served, so get online and put that in there, because here's the thing. Like I said, we just got up to 2018 funding levels for National WEGO, right? We cannot see that dwindle back down again, because if we do, guess what's going to happen to the services that they're providing? They're going to be cut, right? In 2019, because of the funding levels dwindling, they had to cut and realign services. It was heart-wrenching to watch, right? So we do not want to revisit that. So I want to see robust funding this year and years forward, but ultimately, I would really love to see Nashville take a deep dive and embrace its future, both equitably and desirably in terms of transportation infrastructure, and fund it like they've never funded it before. Like pie in the sky, let's go for it. Let's be the first city to center neighborhoods and make it so accessible that we become the city that other cities study. How do they do that? I want to do what they did.
I have lots of things. I wish. Maybe, just to summarize it, I guess, fewer perfect remodels.
I'm gonna say in the next year, I think it would be great if the Civic Design Center initiated a new plan or something where we can really pull together these ideas. I keep looking at Nashville and saying, there is so much money and it's not getting to the right people, and that it feels like a logistics problem. How do you get the money where it needs to be? How do you get the money to do the things that we want it to do? Because I think we have a beautiful opportunity in Nashville to really change a lot, because so many people want to bring money to Nashville. How do you get it to the things that are going to make the biggest impact and create the most long-term success for the city? So if you want to hear.
Well, we're launching a strategic plan process in the next couple months, so you should it'll be on our board.
All right, sounds good.
All right, well, thanks to all of us and to everybody here. Parting notes to everybody here in the audience. We will be doing our 3rd series on the principles on March 24th. And also, I'm really excited that on March 31st, We will be doing our book club. We will be reading Reclaiming Your Community by Majora Carter. And Majora Carter, who's a dear friend of ours, she's our keynote speaker a few years ago, is actually going to be joining us via Zoom from New York to participate in that book event. So you can connect with us, get signed up. If you join as a new member, you'll get a free copy of the book and you'll get an invitation to participate in that. So
And if you're a member already, you can sign up today and
Yes.
take home your book today.
yes, existing members, get free copies.
If you sign up.
I'd love to have you participate in that. We're really excited. So thank you all, and we'll see you at the next event.
Thank you.